Expertgruppen för biståndsanalys, EBA, är en statlig kommitté som oberoende analyserar och utvärderar svenskt internationellt bistånd för att det ska kunna förbättras och utvecklas. EBA har 10 ledamöter med kompetenser från olika biståndsområden och ett kansli som verkställer besluten. Förutom våra rapporter så ordnar vi seminarier, workshops och möten mellan olika parter. Varje år sammanfattar EBA sin verksamhet i årsberättelsen Biståndsanalys. Den kan beställas från kansliet eller laddas ner på eba.se. EBA har ett oberoende i relation till uppdragsgivaren regeringen, liksom i relation till vad som utvärderas, samt till de rapportförfattare som anlitas. Rapportförfattarna ansvarar själva för slutsatser och rekommendationer i sina studier. Allt vi producerar som rapporter, seminarier och vår podcast EBA-podden finns tillgängligt på vår hemsida.
Welcome everybody to this combined hybrid event. We are physically at the Museum of the Mediterranean in Stockholm, but we also have people following this event online. You are all very, very welcome. We are going to discuss today under the heading of Building Peace, lessons from the peacebuilding work of the Folke Bernadotte Academy. And the foundation for this discussion is the report In Pursuit of Sustainable Peace, an evaluation of the Folke Bernadotte Academy 2008 to 2019. And the authors are Niklas Svensson, Julian Bratt, Adam Moe-Feierskow, and Charlotte Bonnet. You can find this outside this room and also online. We have the EBA has commissioned this evaluation because of the important role that the Folke Bernadotte Academy plays in within the Swedish development cooperation system, with a very broad and very ambitious mandate. And we were interested to see to what extent FBA is able to fulfill this mandate, and also to look specifically how FBA manages to coordinate with other actors in the development cooperation system. But before going into the report, I have to confess to a serious failure on our part today. Those of you who have looked at the program, and as you will soon see, we have an all-male panel today. This was not our intention. Up until only yesterday we thought that we would be a mixed panel, but for different reasons this did not happen. I think this is serious. We could have postponed, but it would have been very difficult to get the people who are now on the panel to come together again for an event like this one. So deep regrets on our side. It's important for us at EBA to ensure that we have a balanced committee, we have a balanced secretariat, we have balanced reference groups, and so on. But today we have failed, and I promise you this will not be repeated. We are going to start today with a presentation by Niklas Svensson of the report. After that, we will have comments from Per Olsson Frid, who is the new Director General of the Folke Bernadotte Academy, by Carl Scow, Ambassador Carl Sky from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also by Erik Melander, who is a professor in Uppsala. I will introduce them in some more detail in a little while. But I'd like to begin by giving the floor to Niklas to give a presentation of the report. Please.
Thank you, Johan. On behalf of the evaluation team, I will use the next 15 minutes or so to provide a summary of our key findings and conclusions. Before that, I would like to start with thanking IBA, FPA, the Swedish MFA, and the reference group for a very good cooperation in the past 2 years. Particularly, we would like to thank FPA and the staff, who so kindly have given us their time and engagement with us throughout the evaluation period. The evaluation started in the summer of 2020, and during which time the pandemic made things a bit more difficult for all of us. By the time we finished this evaluation in early 2022, FPA had already launched a new organization on January 1st, 2021. FPA has been part of an evolving organizational development process for some time now. We know that certain of our findings from the period evaluated are already reflected in FPA's new organizational process. Before I present the findings and conclusions, just a reminder about the core evaluation questions. 1. Whether and how FPA's past activities have contributed to the agency's overarching long-term objectives. 2. Whether these are effectively coordinated with relevant actors in Sweden and internationally, including in conflict and post-conflict countries. In order to respond to these evaluation questions, we collected data through a mix of interviews, focus group discussions, and a survey. In total, we have interviewed more than 100 plus persons. We reviewed an extensive amount of documentation. We used a case study methodology and focused on 3 interventions in 3 countries: Colombia, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Liberia. The evaluation has assessed FPA's performance during the period 2008-2019 with a focus on the latter years. So, our key findings. FPA has delivered on several different MFA strategies and contributed to the objectives of those strategies. So what did we learn? We learned that FPA has made a difference in terms of FPA's 3 long-term visionary objectives and contributed towards Swedish strategic objectives. The evaluation provides examples that demonstrate contributions to these. There are some areas that stand out: training and secondments, which are FPA trademarks and where FPA has a well-deserved reputation for delivering quality and makes a relevant and significant contribution to the agency's objectives and results. Likewise, FPA managed secondments have contributed to peace and crisis management initiatives. FPA operates as a highly efficient and effective service provider, recruiting and managing around 130 individuals annually. Secondees are well prepared by FPA and contribute effectively to their respective missions. On bilateral cooperation, we find that FPA's theories of change for strengthening key institutions in the 3 case countries did not fully capture what it takes to meaningfully contribute to wider peacebuilding effects. However, FPA's institutional partnership and collaboration with the Agency for Reincorporation and Normalization, ARN, in Colombia, which guides former combatants to achieve their life goals while strengthening ties with their families and the community, generated higher level outcomes. With regard to research policy and methods, we find FPA to punch above its weight in global knowledge production within its fields. This contributes to FPA being an effective and skilled at maintaining and influencing international policy debates in fora such as the United Nations. While the importance of evidence and research on peace, security, and development to the effectiveness of FPA's activities is acknowledged throughout the agency, there are significant challenges in ensuring that research influences everyday work and programs, activities, or on strategies. So, to our conclusions. We find that FPA accomplishes a great deal, especially considering its modest funding. FPA is very active and has produced and delivered a huge number of activities and outputs. FPA is globally respected. It is widely appreciated for what it does. FPA has achieved many good results at the individual level. The agency's impact on peace writ large has been somewhat limited. It has brought about transformational changes at the individual level in the form of perceptions of gender norms, stronger leadership, inclusive peace building, and the other aims that reside with FPA's training and exercises. The evidence of impact on institutional change is mixed. That is, the application of learning and knowledge leading to wider effects is difficult to determine and often rather vague. We argue that the effectiveness of FPA's implementation of bilateral cooperation strategies are enhanced when there is a clear and defined national counterpart to FPA with whom FPA can develop a long-term partnership, or when there is a peace or reconciliation process where FPA's expertise can be used for facilitating and supporting dialogue and mediation or other peace-building processes. There are a number of tensions in FPA's position as a government agency vis-à-vis its technocratic focus, its relationship with the Swedish MFA and SIDA, and its own structure and internal workings. The evaluation points to 5 areas that FPA must consider as it moves forward to deliver on its mandate. These are: 1. Higher level impact. 2. Scalability. 3. Strategic coherence. 4. Expertise and knowledge. 5. Coordination. Let me go through each one of them. In terms of higher level impact, our findings underline a need for FPA to become better at coherently mobilizing resources and competences and coordinating with others to achieve impact. There is a need to build a framework or approach for how to link and support the transformational changes occurring at the individual level to the factors that contribute to change beyond this level. Thus, the relevance and effectiveness of FPA will be greater when it can support its partners to put in place the conditions that enable an effective operationalization and institutionalization of the knowledge and skills gained by FPA's training participants. In terms of scalability, FPA's higher level objectives contain pronounced ambitions, and we conclude that achieving impact will require a greater focus on scalability. FPA will need to improve its focus on joining up with other actors and contributing towards a larger whole. Clear counterparts and processes higher up the chain than local organizations will enhance FPA's opportunities to identify and follow up on critical leverage points for institutionalization and peace building through collaboration with other agencies, and together create scalability and wider peacebuilding effects. In terms of strategic coherence, we find that under the right circumstances and when employed strategically and coherently, FBA's activities and instruments can obtain impact above and beyond the sum of their parts. We conclude that there is a need to introduce improved institutional mechanisms and procedures for ensuring cross-program fertilization and collaboration, as well as internal regimes for institutional learning from both successful and unsuccessful cases. FBA should re-emphasize the need for greater strategic coherence coupled with structured and institutionalized cooperation between departments to ensure effective use of in-house resources and competences in efforts of policy support and influence. It should obviously do so in a form that does not hamper the agency's agility, the use of individual networks, entrepreneurship, and the flexibility to swiftly utilize windows of opportunity. In terms of expertise and knowledge, we find that FBA's ambition of being an expert agency does not resonate with the pronounced mismatch found between actual resources devoted to direct research production in the agency and ambition of being an organization deeply embedded in and a direct producer of research-based knowledge and evidence. We conclude that there is a need for building up a new set of habits within FBA on research integration that both motivates and places greater emphasis on employees beyond the designated research department. In terms of coordination, FBA's theory of change should show how effective scalability and strategic coherence can be enhanced through collaboration with other international actors, working together to improve the interaction between local peace and security actors with national actors and processes. Coordination between FBA and other Swedish and international actors is critical for achieving scalability and higher level results. In view of the limited resources for FBA, the often weak focus on coordination and harmonization with other relevant actors appears to be a missed opportunity, and we suggest that FBA pursue more regular thematic cooperation, especially with SIDA, both at headquarters and in-country level, in order to realize ambitions of a joined-up Swedish approach. Furthermore, the combination of ambitious mandates and limited resources provided to it by the Swedish MFA, particularly where they pertain to contributions to bilateral cooperation strategies, creates tension in the degree to which FBA can shape and act on its own strategic ambitions. This touches deeply upon the MFA-FBA relationship and its delicate balancing between tasking by the MFA and the FBA's room for and mandate to decide how it should strategically and efficiently use its resources. So lastly, let me say a few words about the MFA-FBA relationship. We identified three tensions that appear most obviously in relation to the bilateral cooperation area. The first tension concerns the technical vis-à-vis the political nature of peace, and in particular peace-building efforts. FBA, like many similar institutions, embodies a tension between the political nature of its strategic ambitions and the often technical form of its activities and interventions in practice. However, sustainable peace also requires a more political effort, addressing wider political power, behavior, or violence. These challenges are unlikely to be met through individual capacity development alone. We conclude that FPA's technical peacebuilding approach within the framework of bilateral strategies lack a political dimension that links FPA's technical work with political processes. There is a need for a clearer understanding of how FPA should be used within the bilateral strategies in support of political processes. If this is not apparent, FPA's capacity and resources risk being diluted because of its very broad mandate. We see that the use of a thorough theory of change approach will provide a means to demonstrate the logic and causality involved in the steps between FPA's delivery of technical outputs and Sweden's political goals. And as such, it will demonstrate where gaps needs to be filled through, for example, harmonization and coordination with other actors and processes. The second tension resides in the strategic and operational relationship between FPA, the Swedish MFA, and other Swedish development agencies, notably SIDA. This underlines the relevance to FPA, MFA, and SIDA of a common understanding of the political space, where FPA and SIDA will intervene to maximize FPA's core competences. We conclude that FPA should be used more strategically within the frameworks of bilateral cooperation through a more nuanced understanding of when and under what circumstances FPA's comparative advantages can best be realized. In the bilateral cooperation area, there is a need for better complementarity between SIDA's and FPA's operations. Underpinning this shared understanding and cooperation must be a closer collaboration around conflict analysis, facilitating the identification of critical entry and leverage points prior to the development and implementation of interventions in order to affect conflict systems positively. And then lastly, the third tension concerns the identity and institutional form and ambitions of FPA itself. FPA is expected at one at the same time to be an agency of experts, a knowledge production, a training academy, a recruitment mechanism, a civil society supporter, and a bilateral partner. Moreover, FPA is also a Swedish government agency and has, therefore, a different status to many other peacebuilding actors, potentially providing it with greater powers of access. A tension, therefore, exists between the breadth of expectations afforded to it by the Swedish government and the deliberate decisions it makes itself around its purpose and objectives, and the depth of engagement, competence, and finance required to be impactful within each of these. We conclude that FPA's bilateral efforts in particular need to be more focused on exploiting productive synergies between its technical capacity development function, complementarities with especially SIDA, and with wider political processes. We hope that this evaluation report will be an important input to FPA's ongoing work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niklas. I realize sitting down here that I failed in two other respects also in my introductory role. I failed to properly introduce Niklas. So as you have gathered, he's a senior consultant, but you would not have known that he's with the Stockholm Policy Group, and he has more than 20 years of experience from international development cooperation, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And he's worked extensively on peace building, humanitarian assistance, both for Swedish actors and for the UN and for other international actors. Apologies, Niklas. I also failed to introduce myself. My name is Johan Shaw. I'm the Vice Chair of EBA. Apologies again. So after having said that, I would like to invite Per Olsson Frid to give his comments. Per is new as the Director General of the Folke Bernadotte Academy since only 3 weeks. Before that, you will have known him as the Minister for International Development Cooperation, and before that, the State Secretary in this same area in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You are most welcome. It's sometimes coincidentally we produce a report where the timing is kind of interesting. So we have now offered you this welcome gift. Let's see how you have received it, please.
Indeed, Johan, thank you very much. And first of all, let me really emphasize what a pleasure it is to be here and to join this discussion today. As mentioned, 3 weeks into this tenure as Director General, of course, there's no expectations of me delivering any type of content tonight that will lead anywhere. But again, as you now also revealed, my previous capacities, there might be extremely high expectations on what I could contribute with. And even though I followed and of course worked very close with the agency in my previous capacities, it's something completely different when you step into the office as Director General, and the inner life of the agency and the work is somehow unreal before you. But it is, of course, such an opportunity to start my time as Director General of the Folke Bernadotte Academy, having this evaluation now in my hand and at the hand of the agency. So it is indeed a gift, one could say. So thank you to the researchers, to the consultants, to everyone who was part of this, and to EBA for a thorough work. For this to happen during the pandemic, it requires quite a lot of patience and flexibility. And I know that the agency have enjoyed to collaborate with you during the process. Now, one of our main tasks as FBA is to help international peace and state building missions to fulfill their mandate. Now the question is, do we fulfill ours? But we very much welcome the evaluation and its findings. We are painfully reminded these days that peace and state building are no quick fixes. They too require quite an amount of patience and flexibility. Peace does not happen in a vacuum, but more on the opposite, actually. They require a whole ecosystem of interventions and actions, strategies and partnerships, interlinked and mutually reinforcing to reach a point where the conditions of peace, sustainable peace, can be reached. And sustainable peace is a moving target. Now, FBA has expertise in many parts of this ecosystem that is needed. Our toolbox is well developed and constantly under development. We form partnerships to be able to multiply and institutionalize our efforts, results, and our impact. And we are happy, of course, that the evaluation shows that we are on the right track in many of the things that we have going on, and that we are seen as an attractive partner and an important brick, not only in the larger Team Sweden efforts on peace, security and development, but also as a partner to many of the important international institutions and multilateral organizations such as the UN family, OSCE and the EU. However, and of course, there's nothing good that cannot be better. We need to move from good to great, and more can of course be done. Now, another reflection based on the evaluation is the confirmation that for us to move from results on an individual level to a larger impact on an institutional level, we need time. We need consistency, and we need the strategic partnerships to be able to do that. And where there are ongoing processes, we are able to reach this stage faster. where institutions are fragile or even non-existent, as very often in conflict and post-conflict settings, it becomes much more complex. And the evaluation has looked on some of the most complex situations that we are in. And of course, then also the evaluation has to be different. But we then need to create the conditions for such processes to come true, for a dialogue to be able to start, for a policy development to be able to start, for a reconciliation to happen. So of course, when processes and institutions are in place, we are better put to reach our objectives. But when they are not, we still need to be there, and we need to create the conditions for that to happen. So at any stage and in any context of this, partnership again is key. And this of course exists, these partnerships of course exists within Team Sweden and beyond, but perhaps could be better articulated and even more be better integrated in the theory of change that the agency that we follow in our work. Now, FBA has seen a large growth in the recent years, that was mentioned. We have expanded our work on our office, and we have also reorganized the agency. And we have implemented new working methods and internal processes, of which some were mentioned earlier. And I'm proud of this achievement. I'm proud to step into an office with an agency with this very expanded task, but are nonetheless never stepping out of the notion that we need to not only do the right things, but we need to do them the right way, and constantly learning and developing our own methods in that way. So I'm proud of that, and I'm sure that this evaluation will serve as an important input in our continuous efforts and our quest for progress and development in our work. But let's also remember that human security, sustainable peace, has become more and more complex during the course of the last 1 or 2 decades, even during the course of this evaluation. All the instruments, all truths are no longer valid. New approaches are needed. New tools need to be developed. And as we speak, the world order, a new world order is being revealed. Multilateralism might soon meet its toughest challenge so far. And when we didn't think it could get worse out there, it just did. I now quote, "The international approach to conflict prevention and conflict management has undergone dramatic changes over the last few years. Experience from complex crises in Europe, Africa, and Asia has led to the involvement of different actors in different and integrated missions to assist conflict-stricken and conflict-prone societies. Not only are these missions truly multinational, they also involve a multitude of tools and skills. It is no longer sufficient to meet the direct humanitarian needs resulting from conflict or to deploy peacekeeping troops along ceasefire lines." I continue the quote. "The UN and the regional organizations have had difficulties in living up to the demands placed on them under these circumstances. Both in the EU and in the OSCE, past years has seen an intensive debate and rapid build of new capabilities. While the exact future role of these regional organizations remain unclear, it is obvious that the main task of developing tools and resources for crisis management will remain with the member states themselves. It's therefore imperative that Sweden, like other countries with ambitions in this field, develop institutions and procedures that will enhance its national contributions to international and regional collective efforts." There's a long quote, I know. But this is a quote from the English summary of the Swedish Commission of Inquiry, published in the year 2000, that eventually led to the establishment of the Folke Bernadotte Academy. Folke Bernadotte Academy is 20 years this year, and the world and the words of the year 2000 is more relevant today than it was then. So as we enter our 20s, we do that as an already established and networked adult, grown up. And let me ensure that we will continue to make progress to create the conditions for peace, development, and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I take it that this was you have seen this as a welcome gift, that it has been useful for you during your first weeks in the new position. Very good. We now turn to Ambassador Carl Scow, who is the head of the Department for UN Policy, Conflict and Humanitarian Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and who had a very special role when Sweden was a member of the Security Council in a few years back. I think it's a special ambassadorship dedicated to that, support Sweden in that capacity. Please, Carl.
Thank you, Johan. But I'm really here in the capacity also as huvudman for FBA. I had to quickly Google what huvudman is in English when I realized this seminar, and the first that came up was chief. I kind of like that, so I'm here in my capacity as chief of FBA. Never a good thing to come after Per when it comes to speaking at public events, but a couple of pointers from me. The first, I mean, my main takeaway from the presentation today and for having read this report is really that FBA is an excellent agency doing a lot of great things, but for even more impact, it needs to further enhance partnerships in Sweden with different actors in Sweden, but also internationally, and try to find ways to also link up even more with processes, international processes and priorities. I mean, this is not new to those of us who have been working with FBA for quite a while, but you have really set out a number of very good recommendations and also, unpacked what the challenge looks like. I mean, for us, it's really about trying to get, well, two things. One is to try to get the Team Sweden, as we call it, better geared up and working together. And the second, again, is to really try to find ways to link up with international processes and relevant international partners in this field. And when it comes to the Team Sweden, I think we've made headway over the past 10, 20 years, but we're certainly not there. I wish we had more excellent examples that we could also use to draw from in terms of lessons learned and good practices. I think we have some. Afghanistan, where FBA and CEDA are working tightly together in a program. I think on Yemen now, for example, where we are from the ministry making a drive to contribute to a peace process, and where FBA is very much supporting the Swedish envoy and the UN effort there. But again, we need to do more to find these examples where we from the ministry side drive the strategy, drive the diplomacy, and where FBA contributes with its secondments, with its trainings, and CEDA puts money into the project. And I think, coming back here in a year or two, I hope that we'll be able to point to more examples. Of course, there are other actors as well, like the Civil Contingency Agency, the Defense Forces, but really try to get the Swedish team to work closer together. And I'll come back on a couple of ideas around how. And the second is really to also be working very closely with international partners. The EU, the UN, of course, other member states working on these issues, because we know that it's only when it's the right timing and when we have others who are also working on the same priorities that we can have real impact. I think a good example of that was when we last year had the OSCE presidency, and the Secretary General of the OSCE came here and really picked up on this idea of working on gender-sensitive leadership and the courses that the FBA provides. And the fact that we, our minister, of course, but we held this presidency, the Secretary General of the organization was really keen. And of course, FBA had a quality product to offer, that when that came together, we made a real difference. So it's not only about working together as Team Sweden, it's also to link up where the priorities and where the processes are in terms of linking up and finding a spot in that. In terms of how, I mean, I think, of course, it's upon us to be more clear about where are those priorities, where are the political priorities, where are we most engaged diplomatically, and to maybe provide that guidance more clearly to the agencies. But I think also to set the issues at the center. I mean, we're very often focused around different meeting structures and agendas and processes, but really put Yemen or women, peace and security or climate and security kind of at the center, and then see how we can be working around the substance or the issue rather than to focus on the process. I think we also need to be courage to test new things, or to have the courage to test new things, to pilot, I mean, to allow things to go wrong as well, take those risks. And so I hope also that this report, we will venture into a time where we try new things and you know, test a few pilots going forward. I think the strategy approach where FBA is also part of the broader strategy for specific countries. I think really that's the way to go, and also increasingly having people in the embassies. I think certainly that has made a difference, because at the embassy you can really tie the knots together. And then of course also to really promote informal contacts over you know, agency or organizational board, and really try to lower the bar for having those contacts. We've had last week only a joint visit to New York, and I think those kinds of visits to the field or to New York really helps for those. I said we have discussed this before, but maybe now is a good time. The time is ripe for a new phase. Of course, with this report, a major contribution, some changes also in management, but also because after 20 years, maybe the organization is ripe to kind of try a new phase. And certainly, as we have heard, there is demand in the world, demand for peace actors. It's a shaky time we live in. We need to be more effective in our peace work, both because the needs and the demands are on the rise, but also because of the resources being more scarce. And I'm not going to speculate in what will happen in the next couple of days, but I can say for sure that the demand for Sweden in this field will remain, whether it's in the near neighborhood or globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kalle. Now I invite up Professor Erik Melander, who has been one of the members of the reference group that we always attach to this kind of evaluation process to guide and advise, not guide perhaps, but advise the evaluating team. Erik is a professor in the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University, and he was the former director of the Uppsala Conflict Data Program. And his research has focused particularly on the causes and dynamics of armed conflict, on peace processes, and on the role of gender in this context. Please, Erik.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to share my reflections on this report and on the process. I have a few points that I want to make, and I think all of them relate a little bit to the professor's perspective and to method. The first point is that I think that evaluations such as this, and also organizations such as FBA, can benefit from thinking systematically from the outset about evaluation, both for internal learning purposes, but also because sooner or later most of us will be evaluated, often by someone from outside. So thinking beforehand about what it is that we try to achieve and trying to make it measurable. Of course, we all know that working with peace and human rights and so on, it is very difficult to pinpoint what is measurable and how should it be measured. But nevertheless, I think even thinking about it and trying to come up with evaluation criteria beforehand for one's own work is beneficial. It will help evaluations, but it will also help our own internal learning. And that then relates to other points having to do with making all important activities possible to evaluate, like always establishing baselines. What is the baseline before we started our activities, so that we can compare and see what happened afterwards? And relatedly, always have a comparative perspective, and Niklas mentioned this, of learning from the not so successful cases, so that we have what we as social science researchers would say variation in the dependent variable. Comparing the most successful cases with the not so successful cases. Try to think about making those comparisons already from start as part of designing our work. And also thinking more explicitly perhaps in terms of before and after. That relates to the baseline, establishing the baseline. But looking at what were the trends before the intervention, and then something happened, and then what is the state like afterwards. Relatedly, I think it would be great if agencies such as FBA could use randomization more, because it is a very powerful tool for finding out about causality. Of course, there are ethical issues when we randomize treatment, we randomize our interventions. But for example, if we are to recruit 25 participants in a course, if we advertise well, we will probably have at least 50 very qualified applicants. And we might just as well randomize which 25 out of those 50 that we select to the course. And then we will be in a position to evaluate causality much more efficiently. Second point, theory of change was emphasized several times. And as a researcher, as a professor, I love that because we think a lot about theories. And I think it can really help us to answer the questions about how and why would the things that we do have the effect that we want to see. And we can contribute as researchers with theories. And I think this is an opportunity to bridge theory and practice, because of course the practical experience must also kick back and tell the researchers this is what works and this is what doesn't work in reality. So theory of change, I think, is a beautiful bridge to connect research and practice. And this is of course one of the strengths of FBA. And anecdotally I can say that I have seen, for example, at UN Women, how FBA punches above its weight, as it says in the report. So I think that's a success strategy, theory of change, emphasizing that. And third, just to emphasize another conclusion in the report, to prioritize analysis, conflict analysis, gender analysis. It is so important from my perspective. I'm a researcher, so I love analysis. But before we intervene, to think through the situation, the context, and the options. And to me, it seems very difficult to try to evaluate, or try to come up with a conflict analysis without taking into consideration gender, for example, because they are so closely interlinked and they overlap so much. So more integrated analysis, and again, this is one of the points in the report that was mentioned, and I just want to emphasize that. And yeah, I think those were my three professors' perspective points. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Please, I'd like to welcome all of you four up to the podium. I have a few questions, and then we will open for questions from the people present here, and also from the online participants. Först då här så kan jag ta mig lite undan. And we should say also, when we open for questions, that there are two other people in the background, colleagues of Niklas is on the evaluation team, namely Julian Brett and Adam Moe-Feiersko are both in the background, invisible, but they are prepared to answer questions if any of them arise. We've made very good headway time-wise, actually, so I think we do have a pretty good space for discussion and for questions today. I cannot resist beginning with Carl, who talked about he found himself to be the chief of FBA. And you also used language saying that perhaps now is the opportunity for a new phase. This is a 20-year-old, a young agency, but still it's sort of past its youth. And the question is, we've all recognized that FBA has an extremely ambitious task and a mandate that is very broad and ambitious. And it is political in nature, as Niklas has pointed out, but the means that FBA has to address these are mainly technical. Do you think there's reason to sort of revisit the mandate and the task of FBA as an agency, or how do you see what could a new phase entail?
Well, I don't. I think that the mandate and the constitution, if you will, entails a lot of flexibility that has not maybe been explored fully yet. So I wouldn't go in that direction, but rather look at what we can do with what we have. But I do, as I said, believe that what we should try to do is to identify maybe a few serious priorities, whether it's country-specific cases or thematic priorities, or a process where, for example, the Secretary General of the UN says that he wants to enhance leadership, and that we then find a way of FBA providing some training or secondments in that field, and where SIDA funds a certain initiative, and that we make sure that we raise this politically and diplomatically on every occasion we can. It's just an example. I'm not going to point to that, but I think we will in this new phase, with your following up on your recommendations, identify a few of these priorities cases, maybe test them as pilots and really drive for them, and then learn from that to see what are the lessons learned we can pull out, and see if that can then more horizontally be applied. I mean, I think that would be from the minister's point of view an approach we would suggest going forward.
Yeah. As a follow-up, the fact that both SIDA and FBA are now governed by the same country cooperation strategies, they find themselves in the same sort of framework. Do you think there's more that could be done in terms of the design of the strategies that would sort of promote the kind of synergies that Niklas is asking for?
Well, I think these strategies, for good reasons, are longer. They have longer. What is it? 5 to 7 years, or 4 to 5 years, and for good reason. You need sustainability in your approach to make real difference. Politics change much quicker, and priorities come and go. Governments come and go, and so I think we should try to find ways where, while not necessarily changing the long-term approach in these strategies, we identify where those strategies now really overlap with what is the priority of the day, and where there is potentially an opportunity to make a difference. I think linked to that, as I said, I think this the posting of FBA staff into embassies has even more potential going forward. I think that should be a standard setup where FBA is engaged. I know there are practical bureaucratic obstacles to that as well, but I believe only then will you ensure that there is that coherent strategy where you have the diplomatic, strategic, political tools and priorities linked up with what FBA is doing in the country, and have our development cooperation coming in behind. Maybe also there are other political areas that you can then draw upon in terms of trade or trade promotion even, that could also link up with such an approach.
Interesting. It will be interesting to follow this as it evolves. Per, again, you've been 3 weeks in the job, but you have had time to reflect on things that you have encountered, but partly through this report. There's one quite sort of concrete finding that Niklas presents, namely the desire to move from the sort of individual level in terms of training, secondments, and so on, and to make these strategic tools, which would entail having more of a say perhaps in the selection of participants in training, the selection of positions to which FBA will second people, and so on. Do you have any thoughts about this, how this could be made in a more strategic manner?
Well, for sure, this is an important point. And we also find that we make more progress and more effective progress, or efficient progress. I never learned the difference between effective and efficient, which doesn't matter. But when we can, for example, let's say one of our areas of expertise, and we're working towards the EU, when we can provide training and capacity building towards one level of leaders in the organization, but we can also second to the organization on perhaps a level up, so that we can create the conditions for this to happen. We do this whenever we can. But of course, in terms of secondments, we do not choose ourselves what level we can second to in some of these organizations. There's a call for contributions. We, of course, always do what we can to provide the best possible people and make them accessible to the organization. But then, of course, the organization sometimes chooses who and where in the organization they should work. So this is not completely in our hands, but for sure, when we can do so, the chance of us succeeding faster in institutionalizing what we want to achieve is better.
Yeah, very good. And Eric, one for you, for the professor. And of course, it's interesting to know if what does research say? Is there research that tells us something about the ability, the potential of an agency such as FBA, which is a government agency, obviously representing Sweden, to have an impact on peace processes, on conflict dynamics, and so on? Is there research on this topic?
Right. Yeah, I think there is some research on agencies such as FBA functioning as mediators or supporting mediation. And we also know there's also research that tells us under what conditions mediation is more likely to be successful, like the level of civil society involvement, how knowledgeable the mediators are, the gender composition of the mediation teams, and so on. But we do not know, I don't know about any systematic research evaluating how an agency such as FBA can support civil society in mediation, or can support women mediators specifically, and what effects that has on the outcome. So we know that the gender composition matters, but we don't know under what conditions FBA and other organizations can help and support that. So the brief answer is, I think we need more research on specifically that. So that's what professors always should say, I guess. We need more research.
But I think also take note of what you said about the need to design interventions in an evaluatable way from the beginning, to ensure that we have the sort of setup and structure that we can actually learn from what's being done.
Then we could do great research on the interventions and on the kinds of support that FBA and others offer, if they are designed in that way from the outset. That would be very helpful.
Yeah. Good. I'll have one also for Niklas, and then I'll open for questions from the floor and from the audience. And this is about scalability, which obviously is a very sort of powerful concept when you're looking at an agency, a small agency with limited resources in very complex environments. And you sort of indicate that scalability happens through interaction with others on the sort of shared strategic basis, shared conflict analysis and so on. Could you reflect a little bit on the concept of scalability?
Yeah, our sort of starting point was that we noticed that as a small player in a conflict context, it is difficult to achieve wider peace-building effects. And from there, we try to understand, so what was the sort of coordination and cooperation with other either international or local peace-building actors. And that, of course, that's sort of the frame for what type of intervention you're aiming for. But in the FBA case, we think that there is a necessity to find that collaboration even more, but through, as you said, the conflict analysis, where you identify the entry points and the leverage points, because the leverage points is basically about scalability, identifying where you can maximize your own influence in a conflict, as a positive influence in a conflict context, which is difficult, requires, as Erik said, a lot of analysis. And you might have to decide where you're going to do this on a national level or on regional, subnational level, where you also have a platform for operating, where there is you have the legitimacy or your partners have the legitimacy to actually play a greater role for influencing the conflict system or the outcome for peace. So the short answer is coming back to the importance of getting it right, I would say, I mean, going back to in terms of the bilateral cooperation strategies, things takes time. Really does take time, and building relations takes a lot of time. It doesn't just happen. You have to build relations with individuals that has to translate into institutional trust between different actors, and from there you might be able to actually do something. And that something might be that you do a conflict analysis with some other actors together. Today we do conflict analysis in a fairly quick way, and it takes time. It really to really identify the sort of entry points and the leverage points. So getting it right takes time, and I know that, as you say, 5, 6, 7 years, that seems like a long time, but your planning process might be almost 2 years before you really can kick something off and then see if are we doing the right thing here in the right way. You might be able to say something after 3 or 5 years, so then you already gone through your entire strategy period. So
we're equipped with Eric's structural way of doing this, so we can actually monitor what we're doing and the effects that we have. Okay, let's we have half an hour actually, which isn't bad. Let's open up for questions. Anyone? I think we have colleagues in the room who have microphones. Please.
Thank you very much for...
Introduce yourself, please, for those who don't know you.
I will not forget it like you did, Johan.
No, I'm sure.
Thank you very much for an interesting study and a seminar. My name is Karin Olofsson, and I'm Secretary General of the Parliamentary Forum on Small Arms and Light Weapons. Actually, I have both a question and, as we say in Swedish, medskick, a point of encouragement. And the first question is that, and mainly directed to FBA then, and maybe to Chief of FBA, not the Ministry, how would you assess that the main findings of this study could inform current vital processes related to sustainable peace? For example, the new strategy on behalf of the government is underway, as the current one is valid until the end of this year, the strategy for sustainable peace, where FBA together with SIDA will have an assignment and a mandate. So my question is that how could the findings in this study inform the assessment that is done right now on priorities that will be part of the coming strategy? And then the point of encouragement, because I noted that one of the interesting findings was, apart from the strengths of course, but the lack of the political dimension. And there I have an idea. Because as we in the organization that I represent, we are gathering parliamentarians across party political lines and across the world to reduce illicit flows of small arms and light weapons and for sustainable peace. Our accumulated experience and also other evidence show that there is a lack of both collaboration with and financial donor support to parliamentary development cooperation. Actually, it was a study on behalf of SIDA just a couple of years ago that stated that only 0.07% of Swedish international development cooperation involves parliamentarians. And given the democracy backlash that we know that Global Peace Index and other researchers have status around the world, it is even more important than ever to support parliamentarians that are struggling very hard also in different post-conflict and conflict settings in priority questions that are aligned with Swedish priorities. Yes, so that was my... And also there are also evidence, for example, a British development study a couple of years ago that states how cost efficient the development cooperation and support to parliamentarians are. So this is my point of encouragement. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Karin. Kalle, would you like to answer how the report can inform ongoing assessment and revision of strategies and so on?
No, I can maybe just say good point, and I think it will do. I mean, we are here, bringing all the different experience into that assessment process and that planning process. And the red thread is really how do we get this team to work better together? I think the challenge, as I said, is massive and it's just growing. And we are a small player. We can't afford to have, CEDA doing one thing, FBA on another, and then the government, running for a third. We really need to try to bring the capacities that we have together to make sure that we can make impact. So I think that will be the main thread of that assessment and the new strategy, and certainly, this is a welcome contribution to that discussion. And I think, your question about efficiency or effectiveness, and now, I'm around experts here, but I remember someone told me once that it's about, it's the efficiency is the wheel spinning, and effectiveness, I guess, is getting anywhere. Or getting there, and I think that's it's an analogy that works here as well, because we need to be in the government better at driving that car and knowing where we're going, but we also need different components to that car. Not only you spinning the wheels, but CEDA putting fuel in the gas tank and other components taking us somewhere. Maybe you can put your GPS analogy into this as well, But I think that's really the thing here. We really need to bring this team together and know where we're going. And hopefully the strategy that we're working on can help facilitate that going forward. Also taking note of what you said about focusing on parliaments. I think, I'm maybe not the person to deliver on that, but it's something I'm taking back to. Thanks.
Thank you.
Building on that, of course, we also need to have a proper map of how it looks, where we're going, and I think this is also where both of you are alluding to that we need to contribute together. We need to work together on the mapping as well, in the conflict analysis, in the intelligence, so that we know what's at stake and how it looks. And in relation to the sort of upcoming strategy on sustainable peace, we are already working together with CEDA on this stage to make sure that we have a joint input or more interlinked input to the MFA on what we could achieve together for the next strategy period. How can we frame and phrase objectives that we both agencies could reach in collaboration and on our own hands? But that, of course, that again, it's a whole chain of command somehow from the chief and down for this to happen. Yeah.
The analogy is becoming very detailed. It's an electric vehicle.
On this non-research side of the panel, we are feeling.
Thanks, and thank you, Karin, for
Yeah.
highlighting the role of parliamentarians, which I think is often neglected in sort of these circles. I don't know, Eric, are you prepared to say something about the role of parliamentarians when we look at conflict dynamics, peace-building processes, and so on? Is there any research that you could point to?
Well, in general, I guess I could point to a lot of research about the role of parliaments and parliamentarians and democracy and the various aspects of democracy. There's a lot of why that is important, as I think we all know. Again, I don't think there is research that systematically evaluates to what extent we can support parliamentarians effectively in doing whatever we want them to do, like reducing the problem with small arms or whatever. So I think more systematic research on the kind of support that parliamentarians can utilize and what is efficient in that regard, I think is needed.
Thank you. So, questions? Anyone? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Camilla Bengtsson at CEDA, and I did a short stint at the FBA also last year. So hello, all old colleagues. Two things I'd like to ask. In fact, the whole panel. I hear the discussion about the importance, and we all agree to the importance of institutionalizing the knowledge and the training and the capacity building we do. But underpinning that, I think there is the question of, do we work with the right actors? Are we building the capacity of the right actors? And I'd be interested in to what extent the evaluation addressed this, or to what extent you're thinking about that in your research, Prof, or in your new mandate maybe for the FBA. And I guess there is also a trade-off between sort of building capacity for better days, for a more ideal world that we would all like to see, versus more immediate crisis management and, you know, addressing conflicts that are actually ongoing right now. So that was one question. The other question is about the political dimension that I really agree to also after many years, decades in development, Swedish development cooperation. I think we're reaching a point where the political dimension it's probably always been important. Development is political, but we maybe tend to address it in a more technical way. And I'm just wondering the way, coming back to how our strategies, our bilateral strategies are formulated based on the policy framework and the different thematic areas, doesn't that often lead us towards sort of a more technical approach to development? And, you know, we forget that we actually work in a specific political context, and context matters has really been sort of a mantra that has been hitting back at us. We can't do the same thing everywhere. We need to understand the specific context where we're intervening. So is it time also to sort of update how strategies are formulated for bilateral cooperation to make them more politically astute? Thank you.
Yeah, I think very pertinent question. I will not invite all panelists to answer both questions, but who would like to take, perhaps beginning with the second one, which I also tried to probe Carl on, the political dimension. How can we ensure that strategies are not purely sort of understood as technical?
Well, but I think, I mean, the strategy in a way sets a framework, but that framework is implemented by people, and ideally those people are in the field. And they are the ones navigating the politics, because again, the top politics you can't foresee over 7 years. That's something that is changing. Opportunities arise, doors close, you have to stop, go back, and do different. So I think that, you know, I was here in a panel on EBA evaluation a month ago or so that Cypri had done on our peacebuilding efforts or implementing, you know, on peacebuilding. And I think the main conclusion there was that we need more people in the field to do this work, and we need people who are better prepared, better trained, but also have the experience of having been working in this context, both in humanitarian development, but also in diplomacy and politics. And I think there are too few of us who have had that experience and are actually in the field and not standing on panels like this. And I think that's a challenge going forward, that you actually have to have that capacity. It doesn't matter how good that strategy is and how the frameworks look like unless you have the right people doing the implementation in the field. But let me just add one more point, I think, on the capacity of the right actors. I think that's, you know, I think there has certainly in this peace business, if I can call it that, in the past has been, you know, extremely dominated by the West, of course, and I'm not sure, you know, we are not in that environment any longer. Certainly we need to have capacities in Africa, in Latin America, you know, managing their conflicts, if you will, by hopefully drawing on experiences that we have built up. And so I think that, you know, an increasing focus on strengthening local capacity certainly needs to be part of this going forward. But I say that also wary that, you know, there is an increasing kind of we and them scenario. Hopefully the them is Russia, DPRK and Syria, but, you know, that's not for certain, but we need to make every effort that it is, and that we find effective ways of promoting our values, or the UN values, if you will. And I can foresee somewhat of a clash in that. I hope it won't be that what I just said in terms of localizing this work. We need to make sure that that work then, that local ownership, also comes with an effective promotion agenda of the values that we stand for. I have another point, but I'll take that in for the next round. Thanks.
Okay. Could I ask Per also, and I'd like you to also use your experience as a minister when you were the chief of the chief, and your observations in terms of who did we interact with, you know, in your political, with your political perspective at that time. Did the ministry, did SIDA find the right interlocutors?
And I think the answer to that is that excuse me now, but that the ministry doesn't always know who is the right interlocutor. I mean, that is also the role and the expertise of the implementing agency to know. So that's why we have FBA, that's why we have CEDA, and that's why CEDA have their partners locally. Because if we would all know all of that at the building next door here, then that would be completely impossible. But we need to work in a way, we need to follow up on our work so that we don't work with partners because we always did, or because I have a personal relation to a person in that organization. And I think sometimes we continue to work. I mean, I'm at least 3 weeks into FBA. I can't say that this is an example that is valid for but I mean, it's easy to think that sometimes you work with a partner because you did it for a long time. It's nice. They appreciate the partnership. We do too. It's fun. Everyone who participates are happy afterwards. This is great. Let's continue to do that. Now, so we need, of course, a result-based approach that helps us evaluate if this is a partnership we should continue with, or if we actually have to change because we don't know if that's going the right way. This is difficult for an organization, I think, but of course we have to do so. But also, who knows who will be the right actor tomorrow? I think this is an even more difficult question, because in these complex contexts, we cannot actually say in 2 years from now, who is the agent of change that will make peace happen? It could be someone that we work with today, but maybe today that person or that organization does not have the conditions or the preconditions to fulfill or to break through. So again, a strategic patience. We cannot too fast change our partners because we're not getting anywhere in the short term. And of course, we need to localize. Of course, we need to know contexts, and that's why we're happy that we now, in a much further extent than before, have staff at the embassies, because that helps us know the local context. It helps us work with the other parts of Team Sweden in that context. But I mean, let's not underestimate technical interventions, because when they can be a constant, when politics cannot. The focus on politics, just as Carl said, they will change. But the technical support could be, let's not politicize it. We need to speak with both actors in a conflict, whether we like them or not. And we support the process. We do not support the actors. And this can be done through technical intervention. So we should also you know, let's not underestimate it. But then, of course, if we want a real breakthrough, we need to add on also a political drive when it's possible and where it's possible.
So the whole sphere of track 2 diplomacy, when that's the only possibility at the moment. Interesting. Quickly, and then we go.
I just think that I hear what you're saying and I agree what you're saying, but I do also believe that you really need to articulate the objective. It needs to be understood. Are we doing this for the next 10, 20, 30 years, or are we doing this for the next 3-5 years? That's a significant difference, because it frames how you're going to resource or mobilize your resources. So as long as you do something for the next 30 years, fine. But if you're going to be held accountable to deliver something within 5 years, of course you need to adapt your own sort of resource tool and your interventions to that time frame.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to my colleague Janne, who is monitoring questions from our virtual audience. Is there anything, Janne, that you have?
Thanks, Johan. It's been quite an easy task, I must say. We haven't had any direct questions as of now. There's one attendee noting, as we all have the not that gender balanced panel, so you might want to restate your promise from the start. And then there's a comment relating to the area of operations not included in the evaluation, that is civil society support. It's a comment from Ulrika Strand saying that related to the discussion on partnerships is that it seems like a missed opportunity not to bring on board the outcomes, learnings, experiences and contacts from the projects from the civil society support into FBA's general activities, and that might, I don't know, lead to some reaction from Per or Nicholas.
Yeah, no, I think what I would like to do is this was a deliberate limitation of the evaluation. We said the area of activity of FBA is so broad that we will not manage everything, but I think this is an encouragement for the new Director General to really take on and have a close look at this sphere, this area of important FBA work, its support and interaction with civil society. So we take that as a suggestion. Please, a question from the audience.
Thank you very much. My name is Michael. I work for PMU. PMU is one of the faith-based organizations here. And I've been following. I haven't read it all. I tried to scan through the pages, especially the DRC pages, and I was looking a bit for actors, as my civil society colleague here also was asking. Could you elaborate a bit on the relation with faith-based actors? I mean, in Eastern Congo, we know that, like for instance, the Pentecostals that I represent, we have 3.5 million members there, but we're not really part of these dialogues. So, could you? Who would you like to respond? Well, one is have you been looking? I mean, help me find it in the report. Maybe is that something that you should look into? Mm-hmm. But also, when it comes to dialogue and cost efficiency and effectiveness, of course, we're not there really talking about money, but who is around the table in different discussions. So that's behind it. Probably like a tip to Per, of course, for future. Mm-hmm. He already knows this, but also maybe, I mean, is it in the report? Have you been looking into it? Yeah, Niklas, would you like to?
It came as sort of a part of the evaluation with whom did FBA work with. And I would like to go back to your question as well, because one has to understand, this is my take on it from listening to the FBA people, and also, of course, going through this evaluation. DRC was the first bilateral cooperation strategy for FBA. And that was sort of a pilot case in a way, a learning curve. And I think that at that point for FBA, it was important to identify some actors who they could work with. They reached out to Kvinna that had operations in the field at the time and tried to build on their experiences. And again, coming back to the sort of who are we working with, because again, the sort of emphasis on conflict analysis, understanding the actors is so critical. Who can you work with? I mean, you could work with everyone, of course, if you're part of the mediation or reconciliation process. And how do you do that? But you also need to understand what they represent, what they believe in, what they sort of strive for, etc. And that's a complex task. FBA has some very committed people on this team who knows a lot on Congo and Eastern Congo, but I would think that, as you just described with your background, that could potentially be, given the type of intervention, be linked up with. But again, I would say that the way we understood it, DRC was the first, was the pilot case in terms of designing a development cooperation strategy. Yes, it's an ongoing journey. I guess that's an opportunity for the future as well, for closer collaboration.
So an issue to be continued, clearly. We have time for one or two short questions more, if there's anything. Yeah. Please.
To that, civil society and faith-based organizations. I think that, and this is not a thought that I have necessarily concluded, but I think that one big challenge that we're working on now is the increasing number of countries where we have a government that we can't work with because there has been a coup, or they commit gross human rights violations, or there are EU sanctions. The number we have: Afghanistan, of course, Syria we had for a long time now, Myanmar, the Sahel, and so we have an increasing number of those kinds of countries. In many of those contexts, there are also non-state actors that we frankly don't want to touch or talk to either. And so, it is increasingly complex then, also for a government agency to operate in such an environment. Of course, there is, more flexibility perhaps than the government itself, but, it's not an NGO far away from government in that instance. And so I think that increasingly in those contexts, maybe civil society is a counterpart for these peace efforts, and perhaps also in many situations it's the faith-based organizations that are the main actors. I think sometimes, since as a Swedish diplomat we miss the relevance of those stakeholders, given that we are perhaps the most secular fundamentalist there is in our politics and foreign policy and diplomacy. But I think certainly that's a good point to pass. But again, I think maybe for a future EBA study, how we now operate in promoting peace, or at least avoiding the worst in terms of collapse in these contexts where we have governments that we can't work with, and where there are a lot of non-state actors that are difficult to interact with as well. I think that's really a topic going forward, and where we'll need to also, in dialogue with FBA, find a path and navigate that on how their engagement will look like in those contexts.
Thank you. I don't see any arms raised, and there's no pressing issue online apparently. So I think we can. We're going to finish on time at 4. Let's take. I think this has been a rich discussion, and I think it's certainly been proven that this has been a very useful, very productive product that can be and is already being used. So I'll give each of you 15 seconds of a concluding sort of takeaway, or what you see as the most important step moving ahead. Would you like to continue?
Well, in a way, I've said my takeaway. My takeaway is really that we need to bring the House together even more, have Team Sweden function better together, and to make sure that we link up with priorities and processes from other actors internationally to have greater impact in this work.
Thank you. Per?
Well, my main takeaway is that FBA is seen as a highly efficient and effective peace and crisis management partner, which is a very it was one of the first comments in the evaluation, and then of course that's we're very happy about that. But then of course partnerships comes as a factor in all of the findings and all of the recommendations. Not that we don't form and use partnerships already today, but we can do so better, we can do so differently, we can do so more strategically, and we can vocal them in a different way. I think that's a good takeaway. Another I think interesting thought coming out of the evaluation, now I'm past my 15 seconds, I apologize, is the discussion on the role or the partnership between the MFA and FBA. And especially alluding to what Carl is saying, if we're moving towards a world where it's much more us and them, it's much more divided. We're talking about alliances and countries, governments that we don't want to even talk to. Now, what role does FBA play then supporting peace and mediation and processes where you need to involve all partners of a conflict to find a solution? And how can we sort of agree on how to frame the space that FBA can work with in those contexts? I think that's a future discussion that we need to have, and perhaps allow ourselves to fail also to find that role if we want to achieve anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, the researchers take over.
Yeah, well, I think I would like to note that a lot of the discussion here has touched upon the need for rich and ambitious conflict analysis. So I think that's because it is so political, it really focuses in on the politics of the situation and the actors and all that. So I think that again also then underlines the potential for integrating the work that FBA does with research, and that the research really is potentially can really contribute a lot to the work of FBA, and also of course from a researcher's perspective, researchers learn a lot from interacting with practitioners. So I think that's very valuable.
Yeah. Thank you. And Niklas, the evaluators, anything that you learned this time that you hadn't expected?
First of all, I actually would like to thank my colleagues who we haven't seen here today. They have been fantastic. It's been a fantastic team to work with them. And I'd like to say thank you to them as well, although I haven't been part of this conversation on the stage here. Then I would just like to say that we all work in some ways or the other with strategies. And I think that cannot be emphasized enough, the importance of monitoring your assumptions, because strategies are assumptions basically, and you're trying to move from activities to some higher impact level. There are a lot of different assumptions. We cannot stop at the first level. It's a continuous linking to the next level and next level that needs new supporting activities. So I will encourage everyone to really keep monitoring your assumptions and being very much aware of what your assumptions are.
Thank you. My final word would be that I think you've done a very good job in pointing out tensions here. And I think that's been a very productive way of framing some very important issues. Tension means energy. And you can use that energy to actually find ways forward that you would not have recognized if these tensions had not been identified. So I think this has been a very sort of pedagogical approach to this very big task. So I want to thank the panel, I want to thank the audience, and I'd like to announce what's going to happen next in terms of EBA reports and presentations. There's one upcoming study on Swedish use of secondments to international actors. There is a report on how Swedish international aid has managed and handled the COVID-19 pandemic, what actually happened within the aid architecture and how was aid managed during the pandemic. And then finally, there's an interesting evaluation on social protection for the the forcibly displaced persons and their ability to access social protection. So with that, thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day and hope to see you soon again. Thank you.